Hello, I'm Dynast Amir.
So I reached out to another friend of mine. I said, look, I need to go on vacation somewhere. Where should I go? He said, go to Africa. And not only am I going to go, I'm going to explore a new country. So I went to Tanzania, South Africa, Namibia, Mali, Senegal, Morocco, Liberia, Namibia, Kenya, the Voodoo Festival in Ouida, Gambia, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire. Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria. It's been a beautiful experience, just learning more about our culture, our indigenous culture. So Uhuru means freedom in Swahili. I'm in search of my roots. In finding that, I would experience my Uhuru, which is freedom.
Till next time, Dynast Amir, I'm out.
Peace, family. I hope all is well. I hope your Monday is going well. Hope you're off to a great start of the week. Do me a favor, hit the like button. Please hit the like button. Also, make sure you share and make sure you subscribe. Brother Ebube should be coming on here shortly. Let me resend him the link just in case he didn't get it. But I sent it to him. But let me send it to him again. We're gonna have Brother Ebube on, and we're gonna get his analysis on the upcoming Tinubu presidency, which is going to start here shortly. Or did it already start? Did he already get sworn in? It's coming soon. Shout out to Grateful Funny Girl. Shout out to her and Letitia. Shout out to you in the chat room. But again, guys, do me a favor, hit the like button, make sure you share, and make sure you subscribe. Before we get started, if you have not bought the documentary In Search of Uhuru, that was the trailer right there. If you have not bought the documentary In Search of Uhuru, please go to searchforuhuru.com. Again, please go to searchforuhuru.com and buy the documentary. I will greatly appreciate support. And I want your support. If you are watching this, and if you have not bought the documentary, please go to searchforuhuru.com and buy the documentary. I would greatly appreciate it. It is a great film to watch with your friends, your family, your aunties, your cousins, your neighbors, all them folks. And then go to searchforuhuru.com, click on the link. You can stream the documentary right there. Once you click the link, you can stream it right there on the site. So please go to searchforuhuru.com and buy the documentary. I would greatly appreciate it. It really means a lot, y'all. It really means a lot. Appreciate the support. Also, tours. We are rolling to Nigeria, August 6th to the 12th. August 6th to the 12th. We are rolling to Nigeria. All right, please visit Danfo, DANFO. Please visit Danfo, DANFO. Africa to learn more. Come and enjoy the Oshun Festival. Again, come and enjoy the Oshun Festival. Shout out to Olasumbo in the chat room. Shout out to you. Just waiting on Ebube. Ebube should be joining us shortly. But again, we just got back from Senegal last week. We had an excellent time. We had an excellent time in Oshobo. I'm sorry. We're going to Oshobo in August for the Oshun Festival, which I would love for you guys to join us. But we had a great time in Senegal at the Jazz Festival. I have way more content. I got a ton of content I got to put out. I still got content from Sierra Leone that I have still not put out yet. So got a ton of content that I still have to put out. I'm looking forward to it. Guys, don't be afraid to hit that super chat button. Hit the super chat button. Guys, I'm going to stop being, I guess, shy. Is the correct, I don't know if that's the correct term, but we're going to say, I'm going to stop being bashful, okay, when it comes to these super chats and these cash apps. All right, send them. You know, I've been bringing great content to you guys since 2014. I would say probably 2017 consistently, and I ain't going nowhere. Listen, I'm not going anywhere. I have proven the test of time. I am here. I am not going anywhere. All right, so please support, buy the documentaries, come on a tour, come to the Oshun Festival in August. I have everyone who attends the Oshun Festival who comes to Nigeria with me in August. I have a deuce of origin beer with your name on it, on me. All right, a deuce of origin beer with your name on it is waiting for you to drink up. A deuce of origin beer, y'all. So come and join us. Just waiting on a Ebube. We're gonna take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back.
Alexis here, coming to you with an awesome sale of 25% off when you use promo code OHURU25 at alexisfowler.com. I provide services like digital art, logo designs, packaging designs, web designs, social media flyers, and much more. If you're an entrepreneur with a business or a startup company, make sure you take advantage of this opportunity, getting 25% off when you use promo code OHURU25 at alexisfowler.com.
All right, we're just waiting on Ebube. Listen, I'm gonna put the link in the chat room. If anybody wants to call in and add to the conversation early, we'll call it the pregame. Anybody wants to pregame, link is in the chat room. You're more than welcome to call in and add to the convo. Link is in the chat room. We'll, as they say, we will pregame a little bit before Ebube officially comes on and starts spitting game like he always does when he's on this platform. There we go. Brother Ebube, what's good? It's been a minute.
Dynast Amir, what's going on, brother?
All is well, man. I can't complain. Can't complain at all.
Loving life. So it looks like we're live, right?
We are live in the flesh, ready to rock and roll.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, I'm headed to our country in a couple months, man, in August.
Oh, I know. You know what though? It always sneaks up on me. I swear. Every time you're going for Oshun Festival, because you know August is August, right?
Right.
August is one of those months. It's like when you get caught up in the summer, and then you look down, and then you look up, you're like, wait, it's August already? You know?
I mean, Ebube, we're already through half the year.
through half the year legitimately. Actually, in about 10 days, it's going to be June 15th, which is the legitimate basic midway point of the year.
Already.
So we were just celebrating New Year's and, having those funny glasses that said 2023, and now we're already here. So, but it's a good thing, though. It means that, we're still here, we're doing what we need to do, and we're still thriving. So, let's thank God, and keep progressing.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right. So election. Let's start off with this. Let's do a recap of some of the of the election. Who ran, the controversy. I don't know if there's still outstanding court cases between the APC and the PDP and the LP party. I don't know if there's any outstanding court cases, and if there are, will they have any bearing on? Because it seems like Tinubu is pretty much a wrap. He's the president. He's going to be the president of Nigeria. It's pretty much done. So these court cases, what kind of effect can they have on his term he's about to start soon, if not if he already started?
May 28th, I believe, is the day he got sworn in and he took oath. But you know what? I have all that covered. Okay. Whenever you're ready to get into the presentation, we'll go. But I'll briefly just make myself known for those who don't know me. And if you haven't already hit the like button, please go ahead and hit that like button. Show your appreciation to the great work that our good brother Dynast does. He puts it in, he gets it in, he makes it happen. And if you don't know me, my name is Ebube Okoli. I'm a Nigerian-born, American-trained geopolitical analyst and attorney. I'm the lead. I own a law firm called the Okoli Law Group, and I'm also the managing director of Up Close and Center, which is a channel here on YouTube. If you haven't been, make sure you go to Up Close and Center and subscribe. The logo looks like this. I'll be dropping a new documentary next week dealing with Africa and space. If you haven't checked out Africa and NATO, go ahead and check that out. But hey, Dynast, are we going to do it where you're going to share the screen, or am I going to share it?
I already shared it. So
cool. So I'll just let you know when to go to the next slide, and we'll just do it like that, right?
Cool. So let's go ahead and bam, there we go.
Go ahead and let's get into it. Hit the presentation button so that it becomes fills up the whole screen.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Hold on, presentation button.
I think it's up there, slideshow. Click slideshow.
Slideshow, okay. Bam,
yes, there we go. All right, so now let's get right into it. So before we talk about an African election, let's go ahead and talk about why any of this even matters, right? Because that's the most important thing. We have to wonder, why does any of this matter? So now if we look at the world's current population, so two things we have to take into consideration when we talk about Africa is we have to look at Africa's size, and we also have to look at Africa's population. Now, we're going to look at size and population, and then eventually we're going to get into the characteristics and the quality of the population, because that's just as important as the size of the population. So now when we look at Africa's slice of the world right now, Africa makes up a pretty substantial slice of the world. There are more Africans than people living in Europe, North America, and South America, essentially combined, give or take. So already you're dealing with a massive continent and a lot of people. So the reason Africa matters is because we're looking at 2100. We're not looking at 2023. We're not looking at today. We're not looking at tomorrow. We're looking at Africa in total and where it's going to be, because eventually Africans are going to make up the majority population on this planet. So now the type of leaders we elect in Africa are going to have a drastic and oversized effect in the same way that the leaders of China and India have on the world. So if you take a look at the sphere, you see China and India. The leaders that they elect have an outsized impact on the world because India as a nation is larger than certain continents. It's larger than Oceania, South America, North America, Europe. Same with China. Eventually, Africa is going to occupy the place of Asia. So now let's go to the next slide.
All right, hold on. Here we go. Yep, there we go.
All right. So now when we talk about the wealth of Africa, a lot of money goes out of Africa. And part of that reason is because, unfortunately, we don't process the raw materials that we own. We merely just export them in the same manner that we've been exporting them in the same way that we were under colonialism. So basically, we literally are still running the same economies that we were running while we were colonized. Meaning, if you sold cobalt to Europe, you're still selling cobalt to Europe. You haven't said, you know what, let me take this and start manufacturing products and make sure all the products are manufactured. Let me make sure that no raw materials leave this country. Let me make sure that they're processed, because it's with the processing that you add jobs. It's with the processing that you actually build out a robust economy. Merely digging out cobalt or any other natural resource from the surface or the ground, subsurface of your country, and selling it to a European nation, that's really not an economy. That's exploitation, because what they're going to do is they're going to take that, they're going to develop it, and they're going to just simply sell it back to you at prices that many people in your nation simply can't even afford. And then on top of all that, after the corrupt leaders that they prop up ruin the economy, they're going to give you some aid and say, well, we're giving you aid. Here's the aid that we're giving you. However, the aid that comes in, first and foremost, that money has to be spent on European companies, and it's really a farce. So at the end of the day, leadership is very important, because yes, there's mineral wealth, but if that mineral wealth isn't harnessed and managed properly, then you might not as well have had that money. All right, Don, let's go to the next one.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So even though Africa loses a lot of money, there's still a lot of wealth that's happening. Now, there are certain countries who they've been actually able to say, you know what, let's actually get the manufacturing going. So now if you look at the countries in the light blue, those are called the big 5 wealth markets on the continent. Those include Kenya, Nigeria, Egypt, Morocco, and South Africa. Those are the traditional places where you see big economies, you see manufacturing, you see those nations and the indigenous people within those nations actually taking advantage of the wealth that's in those nations. Now, if you see the new wealth hubs that are emerging in Africa, those are the nations that are in orange. You see Congo, you see Ghana, you see Sierra Leone, you see Ethiopia. Those are the nations that are saying, you know what, we can play on the continent just as well as some of the other traditional big boys. And for those of us in the diaspora, who aren't from any of these nations, this is a good map to decide where to invest. You can take a look at these nations and say, okay, these are the nations that other people have had success. These are the nations that other Africans and the Africans on ground have had success there. These are the places that I should be targeting, because at the end of the day, the world is a global game, and you got to be able to play the game globally. And let me not leave Mauritius out. Mauritius is a very well-planned, very run country. And that's one of the new wealth hubs emerging in Africa, especially within tourism. Some of the beaches there are simply amazing and can rival any other beach anywhere in the world.
Whoa. Don't sleep on river number 2 in Freetown, Sierra Leone.
Well, the thing is this, Dynast. Listen, there are so many spots in Africa. We would be here for 6 hours if we started naming all of them. The thing is, Dynast, let's not play, because Africa is really that spot. And I don't gotta preach to the choir. You understand?
Yeah, I'm partial to river number 2.
But listen, Dynast,
I'll be honest.
I've seen some of the videos you posted from there. That place is beautiful. Like originally, I wanted to invest in Port Harcourt or Kwai Bomb, but now I'm looking over there. Like, man, let me test my DNA to see if I got a little bit of that in me.
You should try it.
Yeah, but it's gonna come out 100% Igbo.
You never know. You never know.
You know what? Actually, you know what? Within the next 2 months, Dynast, next time we link up, give me some more information about that, and I'm gonna make it happen.
Okay, cool.
But let's go to the next slide. All right. So now we talked about the caliber of African, right? The type of African. And if we look at this map represents all of the different tribes. And I don't like using the word tribe. It's because some of these tribes are 70 million people deep. So to say tribe is almost like a pejorative at this point, because you don't call the French tribe. But being African, we understand what we say when we mean, or what we mean when we say the word tribe. So if you look at Africa, you see that Africa is many, many, many distinctive individual nations. And we'll get into the size of Africa later. But if you look to the traditional borders, and then you look at the actual ethnic makeup, you'll see that in the center of Africa, this is, there are so many different unique cultures in Africa. That's why when people, talk about a blanket statement like African people are like this, it's like, you don't know Africans. Somali are very different than Liberians. Nigerians are very different than Senegalese. Someone from Zimbabwe, they have a different temperament than someone from Chad. Someone from Libya is very different than somebody from Namibia. So we look at this map, we see that there are so many different cultures in Africa. Beautiful cultures too. Donish, you had a question?
No, not at all.
All right. So now, so we take a good look at the map and we understand that these are all of the different tribes of Africa. And let's go ahead and go to the next slide.
Let me do this real quick. I can't isolate you. It's up close and center. B31. Someone's asking, what's the guest speaker?
Okay, the channel is up close and center. I do periodic documentaries. I'm dropping another documentary next Saturday. The last documentary I dropped was Africa, China, NATO. Africa, China, NATO on Up Close and Center. If you haven't been, make sure you go to Up Close and Center and subscribe. The documentaries I drop are for 2100. I released that information because by 2100 Africans will be close to making up the world's majority population, and there's certain things that we need to understand and deal with. So I'm doing that for posterity's sake. So the documentaries now they're being put out there to last another 70, 80 years. So when you look at the information, just understand that you're getting information that's going to be relevant for about 80 years at the minimum. All right, so now let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so now if we look at the map to the left of the screen, we see that this is what Africa looked like right before colonization, right? Right before this is 1880, I believe. 1870, 1880, and you can see all the different nations of Africa, right? You can see that there were certain nations that were larger, certain nations that were smaller. You can see where the European influence is starting to creep in, but you can generally see that this is Africa before colonization. So you saw all of the different ethnic groups of Africa. Now what you're seeing is a map that includes all of the different nations, how Africans originally organized ourselves prior to Europeans coming and organizing us for them. Now, if you look at the map to the right, this is what a think tank put together and said this is most likely what Africa would have looked like had the Europeans not come in and created countries. Now, it somewhat looks like the pre-existing nations, which means that the Europeans somewhat did a good job in putting together those nations. However, you can see that there are distinct differences. So when we look at Africa, we have to remember that the African nations, let's say you're in charge of an African nation. Not only do you have to deal with running a nation, but you have to deal with running the nations that reside within the nation that you're running. So you have nations within nations, which can be a good thing if harnessed properly. So now, if you go about it the correct way and you use your diversity as a bonus, as opposed to being a negative, you can get really far. However, this is just a map to show that this most likely would have been these nations most likely would have been the nations that would have emerged had colonialism never happened. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide.
Shout out to Candace, who's in the chat room, who's coming to Niger with us. Next slide.
Candace, you're going to enjoy Nigeria. So here's a zoom in, an up close on Nigeria, because we're going to be focusing on Nigeria over the course of this presentation. So we see here we have Oyo, we have the Sokoto Caliphate, we have Benin, we have the Arochukwu Confederacy, we have Bornu Kingdom, we have different sultanates. And essentially, this is what the British found when they came to Nigeria. And then, of course, Lagos was already a British colony at 1880. But if you look at Oyo, Lagos really used to belong to Oyo until the British took it through dubious means, but eventually they acquired ownership of Lagos, which became the first colony in what would become Nigeria. But outside of that, if you look at Nigeria, Nigeria was already pretty developed in regards to nationalities. The only nation up here, the only empire here that isn't here is Uri. But at this point, the Arochukwu Confederacy had taken prominence over Uri at this point. Benin was still powerful. Oyo was in a precarious situation because they were dealing with the Europeans coming in from the south, the Sokoto Caliphate pushing southward from the north, and then Dahomey pushing against them. Benin and Oyo had small friction here and there. Of course, the Sokoto Caliphate had famous wars with the Bornu Kanem Empire. The Arochukwu Confederacy was militarized, but wasn't engaged in any warfare at this point. So this is the situation that Europeans came to, and they found different empires and nations when they came to Nigeria. So it wasn't as if they just came and just found a bunch of people who were, sitting around waiting to be colonized. They found very distinct groups. So in the Sokoto Caliphate, they had different caliphs and the like. Benin, they had the amazing walls. They had a magnificent culture. Oyo, likewise, they had a very sophisticated culture. The Arochukwu Confederacy at that point was a democratic state. Bornu Kanem was one of the longest lasting empires in Africa. So if you just look at the nations that make up the present nation of Nigeria, there's really no excuse. You have too many great nations here all in one place for Nigeria not to be one of the most competitive nations globally. We'll get into why that may or may not be the case. However, if we look at the nations, the independent nations that made up Nigeria, which is a country that's about 80 years old, some of these empires and caliphates and confederacies are hundreds, if not thousands of years old. But Nigeria as a nation is 80 years old. So my personal thesis or theory is that because of the young nature of Nigeria as a nation is still developing, because culturally Nigeria is very developed. If you go to the north and you go into the Hausa culture, it's a very sophisticated, developed culture. If you go and see the Yoruba, my Yoruba brothers, very sophisticated people. Edo, same thing. Of course, Igbos, you already know. Our culture goes back very far. So we're very sophisticated people, very intelligent people. However, we're inside of a nation where we haven't quite figured out how to make that nation reflect our brilliance. And I would say that's the main problem of Nigeria. But anyway, this is just a snapshot of the place that eventually became Nigeria. Geographically, the Sokoto Caliphate and the Bornu Kanem Empire, which was also, I'd say that was more of a sultanate, but those two places geographically take up the most space and politically have a lot of control in the nation that eventually became Nigeria. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, this is a very important slide here because when we look at it, we see why Africa is going to be important. Because eventually Africans are going to make up the majority of the world's population. So if you just came to planet Earth from any other planet in the solar system and you wanted to see what the average human was doing, chances are you would land somewhere in Africa. Now, if we look at the map, we see that Asia is taking a slight downturn, which is going to turn into a large downturn, partially because China, unfortunately, engaged in a very unwise policy, the one-child policy. And unfortunately for them, at the same time, people had gender selection available to them. So a lot of people selected to have boys. So if you think about a nation where everybody wants a son, if you can only have one child, well, then who are all these sons going to procreate with? Right? You have an overabundance of sons. Now, because you have an overabundance of sons, many men will simply just go unmarried because by the numbers, they can't marry anybody. And many women will hold out for the highest bidder, which can be good, but can be bad, as we're seeing in China with the demographics going in recession at this point. Similar to India, eventually India is going to peak out. You can only have so many people in a geographical location. But if we look at Africa, and we're about to get into the size of Africa and how massive Africa is, Africa is the only continent where there's really room to grow and a growing population. So those are the two most important things. You have a growing population and room to grow. Now, the real question is, what type of leadership are we going to have? Because at the end of the day, if we don't have quality leadership, the reason Africa matters is because at the end of the day, Africa is going to be the continent that's going to make up the majority of the human beings on this planet by 2100 and beyond. Are we as Africans preparing for this great expansion? Because Africa at one point was the most populated continent. We went through invasions since ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, when the Asiatics first began entering Africa. And then we went through Arabs, Asiatic Arabs coming in from the Gulf in the 7th century AD. And then we also faced the Romans slightly before that. And then before facing the Romans, we also later had to face the Europeans, filling the continent full of weapons and encouraging warfare among African nations. And then after we had shot each other enough, they came in and said, all right, the weapons we didn't sell you, like the Gatling gun, we're going to unleash those on the winners, because that was the prize for fighting your brother. So essentially, the African nations that were successful at defeating other African nations, their trophy was the fact that the Europeans came in with Gatling guns and easily dealt with them. So now, because of all of that, now Africa has relative peace. The population is actually growing back to what it was prior to all of that. And eventually, everything balances itself out. Africa in antiquity was always the most populated continent. Now it's getting back to that. But the question is this: are we going to get back to the glory days, or are we just going to have a lot of people in a lot of misery, suffering, and smiling? Let's go to the next slide. Now, this is an interesting thing because most Africans live inside cities. Most Africans are urban at this particular point in our development. And out of the 20 cities, the 20 mega cities of the world, half of them are going to be African. So, for example, if we look at Lagos in 2010 had a population of almost 11 million. By 2100, Lagos will have a population of almost 100 million people. That's almost half the current size of Nigeria at present. So now the question is this: the infrastructure that we have, right? So right now, Lagos, we'll say, give or take, has the population of 20 million. Okay, let's say 20 million is the population of Lagos. In the next 75 years, for every one person you see in Lagos, there's going to be 5. So every Suya guy you see, there's going to be 5 of them. Just multiply that by 5. Every person you see trekking on the road, multiply that by 5. Every person you see anywhere, multiply them by 5, and that's the future of Lagos. Are we as Africans, are we as Nigerians preparing for that eventual reality? I often say it's like this. At the end of the day, it's like homework. Eventually, your homework is going to be due the next morning. Now, if you spend all night watching TV and you wake up and you show up to class, you know your homework is going to be done and you didn't do any of your homework. So eventually, it's going to get to a point where you're embarrassed because you didn't do anything to prepare for what you knew was already going to happen. You didn't do anything to prepare for what you knew was already going to come. So at the end of the day, we as Africans, are we ready? Are we electing leaders who are saying we need to look to 2100? Not I need to look to loot the treasury for my family to sustain themselves till 2100. No. Am I setting up infrastructure? Are we creating a system where there's so much infrastructure, where people are saying, why are you building all these highways, roads, bridges, trains, and everything else? There's not even this many people. And you let them know, listen, we're about to be 5 times the amount of people here. That's why we're doing all of this. I have to ask questions. African leaders, is that what we're doing? All right, next slide. So this will give you the distribution of the world's 20 largest cities by population. So you'll see Asia, of course. Asia has traditionally been one of the places where you will find the largest cities, but some people will be surprised to know that Mogadishu, for example, beautiful beaches, very strategically placed, long-running, cultured place. Somalia, Addis Ababa, very beautiful country. Ethiopia, very genuine people there. It's going to be one of the world's largest cities. Khartoum, Cairo, Niamey, Lagos, Kinshasa, Lusaka, Dar es Salaam, Nairobi, Kampala. These are going to be the world's largest cities. These are going to be the drivers. These are going to be the cities that everybody knows about on planet Earth. Are we as Africans ready for that? This is why it's important to make sure that we're electing African leaders who understand that this is where we're going. It's almost as if you're planning a wedding for 30,000 people and you get a budget of $2 million. And instead of spending that budget to make sure that everybody is going to have a place to sit, going to have plates, going to have forks, you instead start stealing the money and you say, you know what? 30,000 people are going to show up. I'm going to spend $500,000 on this. And now people show up and they don't have forks. They don't have plates. People are eating off of paper plates. Some people are sitting on the floor. That's the situation that we face in Africa. Because at the end of the day, the population is coming, because I'm about to get into the space and the size of Africa. And once you understand the size of Africa, you'll understand how it can sustain this many people. But let's go to the next slide. So now if you look at Africa in the 1900s, it took 3 Africas to make 1 Europe in terms of population. 1993 is when things evened out, which means that it took 1 Africa to make 1 Europe in 1993. By 2020, it took 2 Europes to make 1 Africa. And by 2047, it will take 4 Europes in population to make 1 Africa. And that's 2047. That's not even 2100, what I'm discussing. By 2100, it might take 10 Europes to make 1 Africa. So now the question is, are African leaders preparing for this? Because if you prepare for a large population, then you can dominate and you can be globally competitive. However, if you don't prepare for a large population, you're just going to have a problem on your hands. And you have to remember, the reason I showed all of the different ethnic groups in Nigeria is because at the end of the day, if you can't provide all of these different ethnic groups a nation that they can be proud of, when the state fails, people resort back to the tribe. So now all these nations are going to fall apart if they can't get it right now. Let's go to the next slide. All right, now, when we talk about maps, the reason most people don't understand the size of Africa is because their whole lives they've been looking at the wrong type of map. And that's understandable, because it's like a basketball. You can't make a basketball into a square. If you take a basketball and cut it in half, and you put both of those halves on a table, you'll have 2 half basketballs. And those half basketballs will still be spherical. Now, if you smash them, you'll get a star-like figure, but you won't get a rectangle or a square. Now, being that we learn most of our knowledge from books, everything has to fit into a book. Books are square or rectangle, which means that everything has to fit in a rectangle. Now, if everything has to fit in a rectangle, that means that some things are naturally going to be distorted. So the Mercator map is the map that's the most popular, and most people have been looking at that map in elementary school, middle school, and high school. In Nigeria,
Hey, Ebube, can we ask a quick question, or you want
yes,
to
sir. Let's get it.
Black Beauty was asking about Alaro City.
Alaro City. Well, yeah, that's good. I believe that's on the, what is it, the Lekki Peninsula. And what's happening is that the Lekki Peninsula is being developed, which is good. And that's really where the most of Lagos will end up, is Lekki. You're going to have phase 1, 2, 3, all the way to 400, right? Because that's really the virgin land of Lagos. Now, they need about 6 different highways to flow through there right now. 6 different 8-lane highways is what we need today, right? That go from Dangote's refinery all the way down to Lekki phase 1. And then we need about 7 bridges that cross over the lagoon. So we need serious, aggressive infrastructure, because at the end of the day, Lagos is going to be the world's largest city. So when you talk about the largest city on planet Earth, you're going to be talking about Lagos, Nigeria. So Lagos, Nigeria, whoever is the governor there has to understand that this is probably the most important post of my life, maybe even more important than who becomes the president, because this is going to be the representation of urban Earth. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, now, part of the problem with those flat maps is distortion. So most people don't know that Mexico and Greenland, or is Iceland? No, Greenland. Mexico and Greenland are about the same size. But if you look at Greenland on the map, it looks huge. In fact, it looks like it's the same size as Africa. But Greenland and Mexico are the same size because anything on the equator looks smaller, because whenever you use a map that makes everything flat, anything towards the edges is ridiculously distorted. So if you take a look at Greenland's position on the map, on a traditional map, it looks like it's almost the size of Africa. However, if you move it down to the equator, Greenland is actually about the size of Mexico or about the size of Sudan prior to the partition. So now if you put Africa up there, Africa would be 20 times the size of Greenland currently. So if you grew up seeing a map in Greenland's position, if you grew up seeing a map where Africa was in the position of Greenland, it would be 20 times the size of Greenland. It would look bigger than everything on Earth. So now you're starting to understand the size of Africa. Let's go to the next slide. Now this map is semi-correct, but once again, there's still that distortion. But this is a semi-correct way to flatten the Earth, but it's still not proper and not correct because things are elongated at the top. But let's go to the next slide. All right, so now if we look at Africa, we can see, for example, the United States is really around the size of West Africa. ECOWAS and the United States, the continental United States, the contiguous 48 states are about the same size. And if you look, you can see that you can fit Europe, India, most of India, most of China, Japan, the United Kingdom inside Africa. So Africa is huge, right? So Africa is large, so it can sustain a large population. And there's a lot of wealth there. So you have a trifecta of everything that you need to obtain power. And you have to remember, the only point about being a nation is to obtain power. If you're a nation and you're not looking to obtain power, you might as well hang it up. There's no point in being a nation because every other nation is looking to obtain power. So if you're not playing the game of power, you're already 2 steps behind. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, once again, this highlights the position. When people look at big countries, they often cite Russia. Now, if you look at Russia, you can fit about 2 Russias in Africa if you move Russia down to the equator. So that should let you know the actual size of Africa. Africa is actually huge. Let's go to the next slide. So now here's a map of the distortion. So the light blue area signifies the distortion. The dark blue area signifies the actual size. The only continent that's really almost to scale is Africa. You can see Africa, there's really no distortion. You look at somewhere like Canada or Greenland, for example, Greenland is heavily distorted. It's not even 1/10 of the size that it looks like on the map. Neither is Russia. Russia is actually not that big of a country, and it's not that populated. It's actually a very small country in regards to population if you look at other large nations. But if you look at how much of the blue is there, it would be shocking. Most people wouldn't understand that, wow, this place isn't as big as I thought. But if you look at Africa, all the nations are to scale. Next slide. Now, this is population mapping, right? Population mapping shows how big a place is based on the population. In the 1800s, Africa was depleted because Africa had been to almost 1,000 years worth of war. Africans had been fighting for almost 1,000 years. Now, without all of those external factors, we are being exploited in some ways here and there, but population-wise, our population is naturally growing at the rate it was growing prior to all of the wars and conflicts that the outsiders had subjected Africa to. And now, if you look at Africa by 2100, Africa is back to where it's supposed to be. Africa is huge by 2100 in regards to population. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so now we see by 2100, Africa alone is going to have 4 billion people, which is more than North, Central, and South America times 4, which is more than Eurasia, including Turkey, times 4. And the only other place that somewhat rivals Africa will be China and India, but both of those places will be in population decline. India due to space, although they have many rivers that run through their subcontinent, they're simply not going to have the same type of space that Africa has, because you can fit maybe 7 or 8 Indias inside Africa. China, of course, because of the one-child policy, even though they do have room, they had negative policies that'll adversely haunt them for the next 100 and 150 years. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so now we're getting into Nigeria's election, 2023. So now the thing is, you have to understand why all of this matters. All of this matters not because, well, my candidate won and my candidate might be able to give me a contract for $100,000, $200,000, maybe $1 million, whatever. That's not what's important when it comes to an election. What we have to understand is that Nigeria is going to be a 50-story building. And we're talking about the foundation of that building. And we really need to be the most serious people in the world, because at the end of the day, we're talking about building a building where we're going to have to live in. And if that building is faulty on the foundation, it will collapse and bring down everyone from floor 50 to floor 1. So now let's get into the Nigerian elections and we'll flow from there. And let's go to the next slide. All right, and these are important elections, procedurally and in regards to performance. Now, unfortunately, the election, even though it was a very important election, this election didn't live up to what other African nations can look at and emulate. It didn't live up to the type of election that we could see and say, you know what? This is what we want from all African nations. In regards to performance, unfortunately, the APC came in under a mantra of change, where they were going to be a departure from what we were used to seeing as Africans. Unfortunately, many would attest and allege that that didn't happen either. And you have to remember that we're building a 50-story building. We're building one of the most important nations on the planet. And we're still talking about things like steady electricity. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the actual election, unfortunately, there were a lot of irregularities. And those irregularities have led a lot of people to have very little faith in the actual election and its results. Let's go to the next slide. Now, even though there were irregularities, His Excellency Bola Ahmed Tinubu was declared winner. And he was sworn in May 28th, and he has been president ever since then. Now, there are a lot of issues with that particular pronouncement, and that's what we're going to get into tonight. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, what's important to remember is that you have to remember something called the first 100 days. In America, that's an important metric because that's something we as Africans have to also learn. If somebody's not productive in their first 100 days, and I mean productive in an actual real way, that's going to say a lot about their candidacy. They're not really going to be that effective as a leader if they're not effective in their first 100 days. That's just how it goes. So now in America, what they do is they look at executive orders. They look at, what you did. And now you can see some of the presidents who left an impact, good, bad, or otherwise. So now you look at George Bush. He was, some people say he wasn't the greatest president. Other people, they might differ. But he was lower on the ranking. Barack Obama was almost double what Bush did in regards to executive orders and output. Donald Trump really was almost Barack Obama and a half. And Joe Biden had to be Donald Trump and a half because he undid a lot of the stuff that Donald Trump did within the first 100 days. So now you see that within the first 100 days in America, that's a very important metric because they're going to gauge that and say, this is how effective this person's presidency is going to be. Like my brother Uchenna says, how you do one thing is how you do them all. It took me a while to really understand that, but it makes sense. How you do the small things is how you do the large things. Let's go to the next slide. All right, now within the first 100 days, and we're analyzing President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's first 100 days, one hurdle that he has to really deal with is the court case from P2B. And I'm going to stop here and I'm going to say, if you haven't already liked and subscribed, please go ahead and like and subscribe. And Dynast, I'm going to give you a 30-second break real quick to go ahead and get everybody liking and subscribing, and then we'll continue again.
All right, guys, if you haven't liked and subscribed, please hit that like button and please subscribe. Also, we are rolling to Nigeria in August for the Osun Festival. So if you're interested in joining us in Nigeria for the Osun Festival, please visit Danfo, DANFO.Africa. Again, please visit Danfo, DANFO.Africa. Link is on the screen. And also, when you guys reach out to me, if you have questions about the travel, the tours, please include your phone number. Very personal. You're going to get a direct phone call from me to answer and clear up any questions you might have. So go to Danfo.Africa. You'll find all the information there, and then send me email and include your phone number, and I'll give you a call.
And also, too, if you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe to Up Close and Center, and also make sure you hit the like button here, and also make sure you subscribe here as well. All right, let's get back into it.
Yes, sir.
All right, so one of the things that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, His Excellency, is going to face in his first 100 days is P2B's case. P2B has been very tenacious. He's been a nightmare in the side of those who would like him to just move on. So he's come with this case. So what we'll do is we'll analyze his case, and we'll analyze the other eight issues that His Excellency President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is going to have to deal with. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So P2B and his supporters cut across the nation. His supporters weren't really based on ethnicity or religion or age, because you had Muslims that supported P2B, you had Christians, you had old people, you had young people. You had people from all over, different tribes, every tribe. So his support base was essentially the people who were fed up with politics as usual in Nigeria. I would say that's his support group. And so because of the irregularities in court, in the election, a lot of the consensus was, go to court and prove that you won. So within President Tinubu's first 100 days, he's going to have to deal with P2B, his supporters, and the allegations that P2B actually won the election. Now, His Excellency Alhaji Atiku Abubakar is also bringing suit, but we're going to focus on P2B's suit because that seems to be the hot button issue right now. And it seems that the Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, his suit mirrors P2B's suit in a lot of ways. So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. All right. So now in the court case, what P2B is essentially doing is he's basically digging up all the dirt. He's saying, listen, I'm gonna present everything to daylight, and I'm going to let the people decide. In fact, there was even him and his people that wanted the proceedings to be televised, which would have been a first and would have been new. But we'll see how this goes, because this is something that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is going to have to deal with in his first 100 days. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so now the claims are P2B and his legal team have put together a very serious number of claims. The first claim is the 1993 narcotics trafficking and money laundering case, and almost $500,000 that President Tinubu had to forfeit while he was living in Chicago and working in the United States. Allegedly, he was tied to a heroin trafficking ring where he somehow had almost $500,000 more actually than that in his bank account. And those funds were tied to the drug trade. The second claim is that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu didn't get 25% in Abuja, which was required according to the INEC rules and I believe the Constitution. And there's some other issues there with 25% in Atiku. In the FCT. Atiku was also harping on that as well. Also, P2B and his legal team alleged that Bola Ahmed Tinubu forged his certificate, which should disqualify him. And then that INEC didn't follow its own rules with the electronic transmission, and that Shatima had a double nomination. And then there was another one, and an electronic transmission of results, but I believe that's cut off by the banner at the bottom. But let's go to the next slide. All right, now in regards to election rigging, right, one of the issues that's being alleged is that the election was just merely rigged. It wasn't reliable. The rules that were set out weren't followed. And so that's Baba Dati Ahmed, Yusuf Dati Baba Ahmed, making those allegations. He was the VP president for the Labour Party. He ran alongside P2B. He's essentially saying that democracy will end due to the fact that Tinubu has been sworn in because he didn't win in a democratic election. Let's go to the next slide. All right, there's also been the claim of Shatima's double nomination. Now, Shatima, I believe, was gunning to be a senator as well as the vice president. And according to the rules, you can't apply for two positions, right? On Indeed or job resume sites, you can apply for as many jobs as you want. However, when it comes to politics in Nigeria, you can only apply for one position. So the position that the P2B legal team is taking is that because he was trying to be a senator and the vice president at the same time, he should be disqualified from both according to the rules. Let's go to the next slide. All right. Now, when it comes to it, and this is something that was picked up by the foreign press, in 1993, His Excellency Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu surrendered almost $500,000 to the U.S. government after a Chicago court found the income to have came from heroin trafficking. Allegedly, and according to that case, His Excellency was involved in heroin trafficking and had to forfeit a certain percentage of money from his account. And the allegations of the P2B legal team is that because he was found guilty of trafficking heroin in the United States, that should disqualify him from being president. That's the allegation of the P2B legal team. Let's go to the next slide. Now, a lot of the documents and the paperwork was released. And after that was released, a lot of people have really dug into it. And some people have given their opinion on it. And, you know, this is all public information. You can read it. It's pretty detailed. It's really difficult evidence to surmount because it's coming from the United States government. And when it comes to prosecution in the United States government, the FBI, people look at them as very reliable. So people have really taken this to be the truth. If you were convicted by the FBI, most people accept that that is, in fact, the truth. If the FBI brought cases against you. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the thing is, we have to also remember that this all could just be a misunderstanding. Bola Ahmed Tinubu has come out to state that it was just a misunderstanding and that the money didn't actually come from heroin trafficking. It came from bonuses and him saving money from his job while working at Deloitte while he was in the United States. And, I believe that as an attorney, I believe that everybody should be given a chance to explain themselves. And this is the explanation that he's given. And, it's for a competent court to decide whether or not these explanations are sufficient. Let's go to the next slide. Now, when it came to the electronic transmission of results, unfortunately, INEC didn't adhere to its own rules, because if it did, then this wouldn't be an issue, because everybody would be able to see what the electronic results were. And you have to remember that there were the BVS and the electronic results, which means that as soon as people vote, that would be transmitted. And after that's transmitted, that's it. Everybody can see it. Similar to how the United States elections are, where you can literally get it with a watch party and watch the results as they come in. That's the system that Nigeria stated, or the INEC, the electoral umpire, the body that conducts the elections. That is the system that they stated that they were going to put in place. However, many are wondering why they didn't actually follow through with the protocol that they themselves promulgated. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the UK has, of course, they've stepped in with their opinion, and they stated that there were certain people who made this election difficult, and they would deny those people visas. It's interesting to see what they will or won't do, but it's always interesting when they give their opinion on what happens in Nigeria, being that Nigeria is a sovereign country. Let's go to the next slide. Another issue that was brought up by P2B and his legal team is the fact that, according to the rules, you have to get 25% in Abuja. Now, in Abuja, according to the results released by the government, P2B was the clear winner. Of course, P2B alleges that he won by a lot more than that. But even that issue aside, the rules state that you have to get 25% in Abuja. And here, according to the results released by the government, His Excellency President Bola Ahmed Tinubu didn't get those, which means that, according to the rules, that's an issue. So that's another one of the claims that he's making. So that's one of the issues that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu will have to deal with in his first 100 days, is that you have someone who's bringing very serious claims challenging your legitimacy in office. So before you can really get in office and really make moves and move forward, you have to deal with somebody stating that you shouldn't be there to begin with. Let's go to the next slide. All right, now with the irregularities, the interesting thing is that this is one of the elections that was heavily covered on social media, which made things interesting because social media, well, the internet really is forever. And the internet is all over the world. So you can literally sit anywhere in the world, and if you're so interested, you can watch the ongoings that are going on in Nigeria. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so now the question that hangs over everybody's head is, who actually really won this election? Now, we understand that His Excellency Bola Ahmed Tinubu was declared president, but at the same time, people within Atiku's camp are saying Atiku won. People in His Excellency P2B's camp are saying P2B clearly won this election. Now, people who are with the status quo are saying Asiwaju won the election. Let's just move on. Let's just focus on governance. Everything else is a distraction. So there's still the sort of Damocles that hangs over the election, and that we're kind of still wondering who really won. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the second issue that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is going to deal with is the subsidy removal. Now, in his inauguration speech, he boldly declared that the subsidy regime is over. Now, there are good things and there are bad things that come along with that, but his declaration essentially put an end to it so far, and we'll see if it's returned or if we truly have seen the end of the subsidy. Let's go to the next slide. Now, for those who don't know what subsidy is this. Like I talked about earlier, unfortunately, in Africa, we're starting to, but we haven't gotten to the point where everything that leaves the shore is a finished product. We're still exporting raw materials as opposed to exporting cars, tires, equipment, parts, computers, phones, laptops, right? We're still exporting the natural resources to other nations for them to put all that stuff together and then sell it back to us. So, but that's changing, but it's not changing quick enough. And that should really be what we need to focus on, because when you're the person who has the wealth, it's your fault if you allow it to go to other people's hands. You have to conserve the wealth. So now when it comes to subsidy, what subsidy is? The subsidy is essentially Nigeria will take crude oil out of eastern Nigeria and they'll ship it to Europe in a crude form. Europe will now take that and refine it into petroleum products and then sell it back to us in Nigeria. Now, the fact that Nigeria buys that, they say, okay, because we couldn't get our refineries working, we don't need to pass the cost of that to the people. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that if it costs 600 naira to bring in, what we're going to do is we're going to pay 400 naira so that the end consumer in Nigeria only has to pay 200 naira, which sounds great. But the only problem is that in a horizontally corrupt society like Nigeria, you might have somebody say, well, because these are exclusive licenses that they give to a few people. So now, once they give these out to these few people, they might collude with government officials to say, well, I brought in 2 million of this product when they only brought in 500,000. So now the 1.5 million that doesn't exist, they now charge the government at a rate of 400 naira every single month. And that's just one person. Then the next person does it. 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 And then the next person does it. And before you know it, you're spending 10 billion a month on subsidy, and you don't have enough petroleum you don't have enough gasoline in the country. Because according to consumption, allegedly, Nigeria uses 2 times the consumption of a nation of its size, which doesn't make sense because most Nigerians, 1 in 3 Nigerians, utilize public transportation as their primary mode of travel, which means that we should actually be using about 40 to 60% of other nations our size based on our heavy reliance on Danfo, Akada, taxi, and every other form of public transportation.
Shout out to Danfo. Shout out to the Danfo guys. Danfo is what I named my tour company after. Danfo, my travel brand after the Danfo. All right, go ahead.
And go ahead and shout out your travel brand, Dynast.
Everyone, make sure you go to danfo.africa, Danfo, DANFO.Africa. We are taking a group to Nigeria for the Oshun Festival, August 6th to the 15th. Link is on the screen right there. Bam. Make sure you go to danfo.africa to learn more. All right, go ahead.
Let's do it. Let's go to the next slide. All right. So now, if you look at the price of at the pump, in certain places overnight, it went from 194 to 540 naira. That would be the equivalent of, let's say it's $3.27 for premium. and you're driving your car today, and then you wake up tomorrow morning and gas nationwide is about $9. That is essentially what happened because there wasn't mechanisms in place. The refineries weren't fixed. There was nothing in place to absorb the shocks of that drastic change, unfortunately. And this is actually something that's a hangover from the Buhari regime. Buhari and his regime, unfortunately, there just wasn't enough money to be paying $10 billion a month. Under APC, the amount of money being paid was $8, $9, sometimes $10 billion monthly. And so for a government to be paying $10 billion, $9 billion in dollars for subsidy, and then you would still see fuel queues, and there was a lot of corruption in that sector, it just didn't make sense. So it made sense to remove it, but at the same time, there's a way in which you go about removing it. Let's go to the next slide. Now, there are benefits to removing it. The main advantage is that it removes a lot of the corruption. Unfortunately, in a horizontally corrupt nation, and you have to remember the difference between vertical corruption. Vertical corruption means there's a small slice in the population that is corrupt. They can have an outsized effect, like the mafia on the Italian community in America. Not every Italian was corrupt, but the mafia certainly was, from the henchmen on the streets all the way up to the Godfather. That's vertical corruption. Horizontal corruption is when the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, everybody's corrupt in that society. So even if you get rid of this set of politicians, the next set of politicians who come in might be worse or just as corrupt. So there's advantages in getting rid of it because, unfortunately, people were making up their own figures and collecting their own money and making the government pay, and they were making billions of dollars. And this was their business. They didn't have any industry. They just milked the nation dry. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Of course, the disadvantage is that the price is going to shoot up rapidly. And when the price shoots up rapidly, I mean, that's going to have an effect on production, transportation, cost of business. There's going to be a lot of downsizing because if I have to pay this much for fuel, I can't have this many people working. And then, of course, there's going to be consumer abuse by marketers who simply say, well, let me just increase my price. And that's what I'm going to do. Even though I bought these under the old fuel subsidy regime, let me just increase my price today. Who cares? They're going to pay it. They're going to pay it. It is what it is. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the third thing that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu in the first 100 days is going to have to face is the economy. Now, we can see here that certain economies have really taken advantage of these last 13 years. From 2010 is the starting point. You see nations like Ethiopia, and this is right before the war. They're not going to be there, which is one of the unfortunate incidents of war, is that Ethiopia, unfortunately, they were one of the rising stars of Africa. Their economy has slowed up, but hopefully they're able to regain and get back to where they were because we need nations like Ethiopia to be strong. You see nations like Rwanda, nations like Ghana, nations like Senegal. And then we see nations like Nigeria around 2015. Nigeria hasn't recovered since 2015. And we have to ask ourselves, what event happened in 2015 for things to just go downhill like this? I'm still scratching my head over what happened in 2015. But let's go to the next slide. So now we see here also, too, the debt. Debt servicing is almost 60-70% of revenue. Nigeria was never, after Her Excellency Okonjo-Iweala got Nigeria debt-free, we see that, unfortunately, the debt profile has skyrocketed. Luckily, Nigeria is a rich nation with money, but the problem is, how long are you going to rely on that? Right? You can only leverage so much debt to build infrastructure, to build an economy that you're going to tax and make money off of to pay back the debt. But if you're not sincere in those borrowings and you're merely just chopping the money, as some would say back home, well, then you're creating a problem for everybody. Let's go to the next slide. Now here, if we take a look at this is something that we really need to understand, right? Nigeria, even with all of its problems, is still $500 billion economy. It still leads Africa. All right, Nigeria, even with all of the problems, Nigeria still, and you have to remember all the nations that made up Nigeria. In Africa, Nigeria should be the all-star team. You had the Uri Empire, the Sokoto Caliphate, Oyo, the Magnificent Empire. You had Edo, you had Canaan. You had the Arochukwu Confederacy, who were practicing democracy since time immemorial. You have all those great nations. Nigeria should be a $4 trillion economy right now. Nigeria should be doing 10 times better than it's doing today. And so even if you look at Nigeria as it is right now, Nigeria is still leading Africa, but it's really disappointing because Nigeria should be better than this. Let's go to the next slide. Now, if you can look at Nigeria, this is the economy of Nigeria, right? From 2014, we had a high point. If you remember back during the Goodluck Jonathan days, that was one of the high points. Her Excellency Okonjo-Iweala was leading the economy, and things were going really good. And you see how from 2013 to 2014, things were going up. Everybody said, oh my goodness, Nigeria has broken over $500 billion. The sky is the limit. In 3 years, Nigeria will be a $1 trillion economy. Now, unfortunately, the APC government didn't realize that dream. In fact, if you look at the graph, things went in reverse, and we've been really struggling to get on the right track ever since. We're still struggling around $500 billion, and we haven't broken to be Africa's first $1 trillion economy. Even though in 2014, we were on the way there. So even though, Africa is still the number one, Nigeria is still the number one economy in Africa, it's like, give me a break. Like, we're at $500 billion still. We should have been at 4 or 5 by now, if we want to be serious, because 10 years ago, we were almost double what we are today. 10 years ago. Just think about that. 10 years ago, you're almost double what you are today. That means within 10 years, the progress you made is essentially half. And if you stop anybody in Nigeria and you ask them, well, how was your life 10 years ago? They'll tell you it was much better. And this is what President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is going to have to deal with within the first 100 days. You're going to have to deal with an economy that, and at this point, there's nobody to blame, because unfortunately, the APC economic system didn't work for us. We're going to have a rethink. I would say for President Bola Ahmed Tinubu to sit down and really think about the economic team, because these things matter. Let's go to the next slide. Number 4 on President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's 100 days in office is security. Now, security is a serious issue because at the end of the day, Nigeria is a place where a lot of people want to come to. Sometimes bad people come into our country, which is very unfortunate. Let's go to the next slide. Now, one of the biggest criticisms of APC is the fact that, unfortunately, they didn't tackle corruption in a manner that they should have. It seems as if they let insecurity take a large toll, and everybody thought that, okay, His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari is a former general. He's going to tackle all this corruption. All this corruption and this insecurity. Those were the 2 things that they brought him in to do. Unfortunately, it appears that corruption skyrocketed and then insecurity also skyrocketed, and the economy tanked. So people are looking at it like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So within the first 100 days, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is going to have to put serious systems in place. And remember, the first 100 days are important because that's going to give you a gauge of how the rest of the years are going to go. If someone starts out very weak in their first 100 days, that should let you know that they're going to finish weak. That's just what it is. Like I said, like my brother Uchenna says, how you do one thing is how you do them all. I used to hate to hear that, but now I love to hear it because it makes so much sense. In the first 100 days, when you first get there, you're excited to be there, you're implementing your policies. If you don't instantly implement policies that make a change in people's lives, most likely you won't do that. And that's what we as Africans don't understand. We think, oh, well, we'll give this guy more time, give this guy more time, give this person more time. And before you know it, more time turns into that's the end of it. Let's go to the next slide. Another issue that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has to deal with is ties to the military elite. As much as we like to say we're a democracy in Nigeria, the military still holds a lot of sway. We see from head of state Igui Iransi, who was only head of state for 6 months. He was unfortunately deleted in a coup. Very unfortunate. Then you have Yakubu Gowon, Murtala Mohammed, Obasanjo, Buhari, Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, Abacha, Ernest Shonekan. He was more of an interim government. But a lot of these men are still alive. Ibibi is still alive. Of course, everybody loves and remembers Buhari. He's still alive. Obasanjo, he's still alive. Yakubu Gowon, of course, he's still alive. Abacha, Iransi, Murtala Mohammed, they're gone. Abdul Salami is still here, I believe. Yeah, he's still here. So now these military men were the ones who created the country, the modern country, because they created the Constitution. They all got together and created the 1999 Constitution. So these men are still in power in some sort of way, right? So now the issue is this, is that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu doesn't have any ties to the military since democracy. Olusegun Obasanjo, he was a military guy. He's literally the military. So he had the respect of the military. And then you look at the person that he handed it off to was the younger brother of his military best friend, Umaru Musa Yar'Adua, who was the brother of Shehu Yar'Adua, who came from the Yar'Adua family, a very well-respected northern family connected to the military, with deep ties to the military. And then after that, you had President Goodluck, who was semi-connected to the military, but not really. His only connection to the military is that he ran under the brother of a military the president who was the brother of a military strongman, but no real connections, right? So he had to tiptoe around the military because the military elite still had to give him that pass. And then, of course, former president, I should say, it's still strange saying former. It seems like it was only yesterday that Buhari moved the nation forward in such a way. But former President Muhammadu Buhari, of course, was a military guy through and through. You can just look at him and see the way his mannerisms are. That guy's 100% pure Nigerian military. And then after that, it's the Lagos State Godfather, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And the odd thing is that he actually doesn't have any ties to the military elite. So that is going to be interesting because the military, to be honest, is a parallel government. The military is their own entity. Now, you have to satisfy and have the military underneath your control as president of Nigeria, being that the military, regardless of what we call ourselves, a democracy, the military still has a very deep control over certain aspects of the Nigerian society. Let's go to the next slide. All right, the fifth issue that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has to deal with is ethnic tensions. Now, you got to remember, Nigeria is a bunch of nations put together. It's not really a nation per se. It is a nation that was put together in a geographical area that encapsulated other nations. So one thing we still have to work on as Nigerians is what's the purpose of us being together? Is it to build the strongest black nation in the world? Because that makes sense. If all of us say, you know what, as Nigerians, this is our purpose. This is what we're doing. We understand where Africa is going to be by 2100. See, a lot of these leaders today, a lot of these guys don't understand the importance of Africa. They don't understand the importance of Nigeria. Nigeria is the most important nation in Africa because it's going to be the largest economy, the largest by population, and it's going to be the linchpin of African development and African respect worldwide. So if we don't get it right, like Nelson Mandela said, the African won't be respected globally until the Nigerian is respected globally. And that's a real statement. But then you have to look at Nigeria. Nigeria is made up of a bunch of nations who really didn't need each other. Oyo was a strong nation without any other nation. Sokoto was a strong nation without any other nation. The Arochukwu Confederacy, the Ori Empire, Edo, Benin Kingdom, Canaan, all of these are all independent nations with independent histories, and none of them need each other. So now we have to want to be together. So now, unfortunately, what happens is this, and you have to remember that tribalism is the disease of the poor man, because all of the elites in Nigeria, they'll stir up ethnic conflicts and say, and here's one thing we have to avoid in this generation is Igbophobia, where we believe that, similar to how people who are anti-Semitic make the false claim that Jews own everything and Jews dominate everything and Jewish people this and Jewish people that. That's an excuse. If you believe Jewish people are holding you back from doing what you want to do in your life, you need to look in the mirror and get yourself together. Now, there's something similar called Igbophobia, where people say, well, Igbo people are coming to dominate this and Igbo people are coming to dominate that. Or Fulani people are this, Yoruba people are this. And it's like, listen, if you're not making it in Nigeria, it's not because of a Fulani man. If you're not making it in Nigeria, it's not because of a Yoruba man. If you're not making it in Nigeria, it's not because of an Igbo man. But you might have elites that sell you that nonsense. Sometimes they mix religion in there and say, oh, it's because of the Christians or it's because of the Muslims. And so when they do that, you have to realize that tribalism is a poor man's disease, because the elites, and I've been around circles, I've been around Nigerian presidents, I've been at the highest levels, and I see how everybody mixes up. The elites of all classes the elites are all in one class. And within that class, you find powerful Yoruba men, powerful Hausa men, powerful Igbo men. And you know what they're doing every time I see them? They're laughing, they're dining, they're sipping champagne for those that drink. They're having a good time. They're the most jovial around each other. And then they'll go out and tell you, well, Igbos are looking to take over Lagos, so you should vote for this party. Or Yoruba people are like this, or Hausa people are like that. And then you know what they do? They tell you that, so you go out and fight in the streets. And then when they're done with you, they go into office and they'll become your state governors, and they'll steal from you, from their own tribe, who they allege that they were representing. So at the end of the day, tribalism is a poor man's disease. But unfortunately, some of our elites, they leverage that. And you have to remember that long after you're dead, the cleavages that you've created within the nation are still going to be there. If you win an election through tribalism, and once again, I don't like to use the word tribe, but just for argument's sake, if you win an election through tribalism, okay, you won the election, your term is going to come and go. But the thousands of people that you got to fight in this one area, those scars are going to be there forever. Let's go to the next slide. So now, this is going back to friction. You don't want to create friction in a society where you're still trying to create a nation. out of many nations. Because it may seem like it's like eating junk food. Yeah, it feels good to go to a drive-through and shove a bunch of fast food in your mouth. But if you do that for too long and you look at the scale, you're going to regret it. Because in the long run, it's not good. It doesn't feel good to eat broccoli and chicken breast for 3 months. But at the end of the day, in the long run, when you look at yourself, you're going to enjoy the visuals that you see. So the friction and ethnic tension in the interim and the immediacy, yes, you can use them to gain power, but in the long run, it's no good. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the sixth thing that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is going to have to deal with is federalism. Now, you have to remember, because Nigeria is a nation based on nations. It's not one nation per se. Yes, it's one nation, but at the same time, you have ancient empires inside of Africa. And everybody wants to feel that they have the ability to control their destiny, period. So now under the current federalist system, we have the federal government, the 37 states. I consider the FCT, Abuja, to be a state, so I'll say 37 states. 774 local governments, and then you have wards within the local government. So that's the federalist structure. Now, some people state that the federal government has an outsized influence in governance, and they're just too powerful. Now, every president has been faced with, are you going to reduce the power of the federalist state? But the problem is this: many of the guys who reached the federalist state had to give a lot up and sacrifice a lot to be in charge of the federation. Therefore, asking someone to give up power is almost ridiculous. Like my father says, nobody gives you power, you take power. So now if I fought this hard to become in charge of the federal state, the last thing I'm going to do is look to whittle down my power. That sounds crazy to me. If anything, ask the next guy to do that, you know? So that's the issue. That's the constant conflict with federalism in Nigeria. Let's go to the next next slide. I think we got to go back one. All right. Part of federalism also, too, includes the fact that Nigeria used to be under the regional system. So you had the northern region, the western region, the midwestern region, which was carved out of the western region to account for the minorities within the western region who weren't aligned with the majority population. Then you had the eastern regions. These were the regions of Nigeria. And up until 1967, Nigeria was a regional system. After that, the President Yakubu Gowon created states. So head of state, I should say, military general head of state, Yakubu Gowon took us from regionalism to states. So we went from regions, and then head of state, General Yakubu Gowon decided to create states out of those regions and move to the system that we operate under today. So now under that system, we've now gone from 12 states to 36 states, 37 states if you include Abuja. And this was right before the Biafran War, right before. So, and this was one of the contributing factors to the Biafran War. But let's go to the next slide. Now, there's also something called the exclusive list. Now, the exclusive list is what the federal government controls as opposed to what the state governments control. And many people have alleged that the state government has too much on their plate and the federal government isn't able to handle everything that we need. And so some states have asked for more autonomy in regards to what we need on a statewide level. Let's go to the next slide. All right. So one of the good things I would say is that President Muhammadu Buhari, before he left, he basically puts electricity generation in the hands of the state governments. Say, you know what? NEPA has tried, PHCN has tried. Some people used to say NEPA used to stand for never expect power at all. Some people said PHCN stands for please hold candle now. But the federal government under former President Muhammadu Buhari has said, you know what, at the end of the day, if the states can do a better job, we're going to take that off the exclusive list. States can now generate electricity. So what I would actually like to see more states generating electricity, because at this point, you can't blame the federal government anymore. It's time to step up and actually make that happen. Let's go to the next slide. All right, now the seventh issue that His Excellency President Bola Ahmed Asiwaju Tinubu will have to face is political prisoners. This is Nigeria. It's a democracy. However, when it comes to freedom of speech, you have to be very careful, because if you say certain things that the government doesn't like, you're going to face repercussions. That's just the reality. Let's go to the next slide. Now, first on our list is Nnamdi Kanu. Now, within the first 100 days, the question is for President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, what's going to happen with Mazi Nnamdi Kanu? Now, for those who don't know, Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, he's a very polarizing figure. For the people that follow him, they believe he's a messiah-type figure, right? For those who fear him, they believe he's the most dangerous man in Africa. So he's a very polarizing figure. There's no two ways about it. Either you look at him as somebody who typically speaks the truth and knows what they're saying, or you look at him as somebody who, you know, they say he's a very dangerous man and that he's too influential. Let's go to the next slide. Now, he's been in and out of court, and a little bit about him and his detention is that he's with the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB. IPOB is I believe is the acronym for it. Him and his group believe that they essentially say that, look, Nigeria is based on a bunch of countries that didn't agree to be together, and it's not working out. We need a referendum so everybody can just, you know, answer to themselves. Let's go back to the original nations before colonialism. That is his argument, is that at the end of the day, let's have a referendum. We don't need a war. What we need is a vote. And if everybody votes to be together, we will now say, okay, we all voted to be together. It wasn't a choice by Britain, and we voted. So now, are we trying to obtain power or not? Now, if the opposite happens and everybody decides, you know what, it's better to go off and everybody go to their own nation how it was before, then that's it. No, that's him and his group and his supporters. That's their position. They want a referendum on the unity of Nigeria. Break it up so that everybody can be great by 2100. Now, that is problematic to the Nigerian government because the status quo is okay. And they look at him as someone who is fomenting trouble, and they don't actually believe that a referendum could actually happen. Their belief system is that by you asking for a referendum, you're essentially asking for war, and we don't need war. Let's go to the next slide. But a little bit about that is that there was actually a court order. All right, I'll explain a little bit in regards to Umaru Diko because the two stories are related. Now, with Nnamdi Kanu was allegedly kidnapped from Kenya, drugged, and brought to Nigeria to face trial. So essentially, Secret Service in Nigeria linked up with Secret Service from Kenya drugged him and brought him over to Nigeria, which some allege is a violation of international law. Now, this was also reminiscent of Umaru Diko. Umaru Diko was a Nigerian politician who left the country slightly after Buhari came to power. So after Buhari came to power, there was a man named Umaru Diko who was in London, who was, I believe, the UK actually. And somehow he was protected by the London, he's protected by security. And he walked out of his flat in London, and somehow he was thrown into a van. The door was slammed shut. He was drugged. And then he found himself in a crate with 2 Secret Servicemen from the Middle East who took him to the airport. And at the airport, they put him in a crate which was labeled Nigerian diplomatic luggage, freight, if you will. So now this is under Buhari in the 80s. So unfortunately, this freight with these 2 Secret Servicemen from the Middle East and Umaru Diko, who was drugged, passed out, they were going to take him back to Nigeria, and he was going to maybe, be put in a Nigerian jail by then President Muhammadu Buhari in the 80s. Somehow the diplomatic labeling was incorrect. So the British government said, wait a minute, what's in this crate? And they opened it up, and they found an incapacitated Umaru Diko and 2 Middle Eastern Secret Service men with syringes. And they said, wait a minute, what? So that created a huge situation, a huge problem in that they looked at the Nigerian government and the then head of state, General Muhammadu Buhari, and said, wait a minute, are you kidnapping people from our country? Which created a big problem. So now with Nnamdi Kanu, it was a similar situation. However, he wasn't in the UK, but he was in Kenya. Now, he was allegedly kidnapped from Kenya and brought to Nigeria. Now, when he went to trial, the court in Nigeria said, well, you can't verify how you brought this person to us. You need to release him, right? How is this person even brought to this court? This is a court of law, right? You have to show us how you have jurisdiction. How did you get jurisdiction over this person? So they dismissed the case and said, you need to return him back to where you found him and go about this the right way. However, that court order was ignored by the previous president. Even though court said you need to release this man, I believe this was last year, this was almost 8 or 9 months ago, that they said that Mazi Nnamdi Kanu needs to be released. The sitting president at the time, President Muhammadu Buhari, just decided not to release him and have him sit in DSS custody. So many make parallels between Umaru Diko and Mazi Nnamdi Kanu. Let's go to the next slide. Hey, Danish, still with me?
Yeah, you kind of went out, but yeah, I hear you now.
Okay. All right. So now you have El Zagzaki. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Perfect. You have El Zagzaki. And you have to remember, with all these political prisoners, the way the law works is, and as an attorney, I'll say this and I'll say it again and again and again. It doesn't matter whether you like or dislike somebody. It's about the law, right? At the end of the day, you have to have a reason to be able to incarcerate somebody. If you don't have a reason, then you can't incarcerate that person. So now with El Zagzaki led the Shiite movement. Hey, Donis, am I still coming through clear?
Yes, hear you loud and clear.
Perfect. So El Zagzaki was, in most Muslim Nigerians, and Nigeria has a slight Muslim majority, according to the recent statistics. About 52% of the population believes in Islam. So that 52%, out of that 52%, 4%, I believe, are Sunni Muslims. They believe in Sunni Islam. And then a smaller percentage believe in Shia Islam. So they're Shiites. So now with that, El-Zakzaky is the leader of a minority group of Muslims. And allegedly, the government didn't like the message that he was preaching. So they said, you know what? We don't want this person to turn into another potential Boko Haram. Even though he wasn't getting there, that was the decision that they made. So they incarcerated him. Eventually, they set him free. However, they still confiscated his passport, so he can't leave the nation. And he's an elderly man who's sickly. So because they haven't released his passport, it's essentially like still detaining him because he needs to be able to travel abroad to get medical treatment because the medical facilities in Nigeria, unfortunately, aren't equipped to handle the type of ailment that he's dealing with. So he's basically still a prisoner, even though he's not in DSS custody. So this is another one of the issues that President Tinubu is going to have to deal with. He's going to have to deal with Nnamdi Kanu and whether or not he's going to obey the court order to set him free. He's also going to have to deal with El-Zakzaky and decide whether or not he's going to release his passport to him. Let's go to the next slide. Hey, Donnie, you still with me?
I hear you loud and clear. Go ahead.
Cool. All right. So El-Zakzaky leads the Islamic movement in Nigeria. There's still conflicting reports on this, but there was a situation where a lot of the Shiites were allegedly gunned down by the hundreds. I believe in Kaduna is I believe the state that's where that occurred. And after they saw that these people were resistant to the government, a lot of their members were locked up, and the head of the Islamic movement of Nigeria, the Shiites in Nigeria, was locked up. And this is a picture of them protesting in Nigeria. Let's go to the next slide. All right. Now, also, too, another set of political prisoners, allegedly, because this is one of those things that hasn't really been confirmed, but it's one of the things that people talk about on the streets. Allegedly, there are still End SARS protesters that are in DSS custody. As crazy as that sounds, allegedly, there are still End SARS protesters in DSS custody. Now, these are the situations that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is now going to have to face. He's going to have to face situations where, what are you going to do about Mazi and Nnamdi Kanu? What are you going to do about Sheikh El-Zakzaky? What are you going to do about the potential End SARS protesters who are still in DSS custody? Because these are situations that happened before you truly became president. Therefore, what's your decision on them moving forward? Let's go to the next slide. Now, the eighth thing that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is going to have to deal with is legitimacy. Let's go to the next slide. Now, when it comes to legitimacy, we have to realize that legitimacy is based on something called popularity. And unfortunately, if we just look at the voting patterns that were released by the government, according to the government's official pattern, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is the least popular president in democratic history. But you had three strong frontrunners that ran. So now if you look at it, you have Olusegun Obasanjo, who allegedly won almost 60, 70% of the vote, Umaru Musa Yar'Adua, who even criticized his election as being heavily flawed, he won almost 70% of the vote. Good luck, 60%. Buhari, both times, just over 55%. Bola Tinubu, I don't believe he even scored up to 40% of the popular vote, which means that most Nigerians didn't vote for him, according to the results released by the APC-led government, which means that he's the least popular president in Nigerian democratic history. And the election that brought him in, many view as heavily flawed. So these affect popularity because at the end of the day, that reflects heavily on legitimacy. If most people know they didn't vote for you, that heavily affects your popularity. Let's go to the next slide. So another issue is with the youth, and you have to remember almost 65% of the population are made up of the youth. It's what people would consider the young people. They were told that your PVC is the weapon to stop debt, poverty, unemployment, corruption, insecurity, impunity, nepotism, inflation, poor health, and insecurity. And they were told that this is your weapon. This is the way you're going to get it done. And then somewhere along the line, the PVC doesn't work. Somewhere along the line, the PVC isn't the weapon. So human nature means that eventually they're going to pick up a new weapon. And if the government is viewed as illegitimate, well, then we have to wonder what type of weapon that's going to be. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this next slide deals with, we have to remember 2100 is where we should all be looking. And if you haven't liked this stream and you haven't hit subscribe, go ahead and hit subscribe. Hey, Donis, I'm going to let you step in. You take 30 seconds. Go ahead and
Hey guys, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe. Also, we are rolling to Nigeria in August 6th through the 15th. Again, we're rolling to Nigeria August 6th through the 15th. Please visit danfo.africa, danfo.africa to learn more. Link is in the chat room and is on the screen. Go ahead, Ebube.
All right. So now you have to look at it. You have to remember that Africa, at the end of the day, nations are composed and created for the sole purpose of obtaining power. They're not just built to have unity for unity's sake. It's unity for the sake of obtaining power. So if people say, oh, we need to be together because we need to be together, then the question is, why are we together? Are we together because we want to be the most competitive, strongest black nation on earth? Well, then let's do it. We understand where we're going. We understand what we're doing. We understand the objective, and we know if we're not living up to that. However, if we just say unity for unity's sake, and we're behaving like a nation that doesn't care about obtaining power, we're behaving like a nation that doesn't care about the well-being of its citizens, we're behaving like a nation who doesn't care about anything except the elites who line their pockets with our common wealth, then there's no purpose in being together. So now we have to realize that Africans are going to be the majority on this planet. That's just the reality. Now, what type of majority are we going to be? Are we going to have millions and hundreds of millions of people living in squalor? Are we going to have hundreds of millions of people dying of malaria and diseases that have already been figured out hundreds of years ago? Or are we going to be a nation that's competitive, a nation that's powerful, a nation that people respect, a nation that's unstoppable? What do we want to be? And who are we going to be? We need to articulate that vision, and we really need to live into it. Or else everybody should just go their own separate ways and figure themselves out. Because at the end of the day, we have to take this thing serious because other nations are serious. Other nations are looking to build military bases on the moon. And we're still talking about electricity. So now we have to understand that, listen, we have to build the foundations of democracy. If we're going to say we're in a democratic dispensation, let's build the democratic dispensation. Let's really do that. If we're going to live together, let's leave the tribalism alone. Everybody can love their tribe, love their own, and come together and do what we need to do as people and understand the differences that make us great, but not forget them, because that's what makes us unique. We can do that. But when we have elites that are preaching things like, oh, Christians are the problem, Muslims are the problem, Igbos are the problem, Yorubas are the problem, Hausas are the problem, Fulanis are the problem, we're not going anywhere fast. And if you're in the youth engaging in any of those behaviors, you're part of the problem. In fact, you are the problem, because there's more of you than the elders. Yeah, we give our elders respect, but there are more of us than them. So we can't blame them anymore. Let's go to the next slide. Now, with this next slide, it's anecdotal, right? There was a governor. I'm from Anambra State. Mbonyananka. Anambra States. Mana, the thing is this. When it comes to my state, in Anambra, there was a governor, Governor Ngige. Now, he was the governor who didn't actually win the election, but he was there for a long time. He was there for like 2 or 3 years or something crazy like that. But while he was there, he performed so well that even though the court said, wait a minute, you didn't win, some people said, you know what? This guy performed so well, let him stay there. People were actually ready to fight in the streets to say, let this man stay there. Some of the roads he built, people are still referencing them and saying, we want roads like that. When he was here, he developed the state. So even though he didn't win the election in my state, this was my governor. And he did such a good job that people still revere him as one of the best governors of the state. So now I bring that up to bring up the fact that with President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, even if evidence comes out, and you have to remember this is still Nigeria, all the evidence in the world can come out and show that somebody didn't win an election. You have to remember that less than 50% of the people actually won elections in Nigeria. That's just the reality. Many Nigerians in public office didn't win the election that brought them to power. I noted Honorable Umaru Musa Yar'Adua, who when he first came to power stated, you know what, the election, it wasn't right that brought me to power. So I'm going to pass some electoral reform to change that. But I'm going to do a good job. So now, let's say that Peter Ob's court case is successful. He has a lot of really strong evidence. Let's say he's successful. However, the courts just decide, you know what? Let's just maintain the status quo. Because we've unseated governors, but we've never unseated a president. And we don't know how this is going to go. And this can get messy. So just contest again in 4 years, and we'll see how it goes from there. That could be the reality. The reality could be it's proven that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu actually didn't win. However, the realities might just say he's going to stay there because that's just how things go in Africa. However, if he does such a good job, nobody will care how he got there, because at the end of the day, Nigerians don't care who's there. They just care. Listen, if you're the first president to provide 24/7 electricity, you're the first president to industrialize Nigeria, you're the first president to fix the infrastructure, you're the first president to produce roads, you're the first president to make us a $3 trillion economy, to how we were in the 70s where every other West African was looking to move into Nigeria for better opportunities. We don't care if you won the election or not. We don't care what your tribe is. We don't care what your religion is. We don't care about any of that. We just care about your performance. So if President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is able to perform to the point where nobody cares whether or not you really won the election, then that's all that matters. That's it. So I bring up the example of His Excellency, Governor, Minister Chris Ngige, to show that at the end of the day, people were begging him not to step, even though there was a court order saying you didn't win, you need to vacate. People were begging him not to leave based on his performance over those few years. So, if President Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, within these next 100 days, gets on his grind, on his dean, as they would say in Philly, shout out to my Philly guys, and really performs, people will be begging him to stay in office regardless of the court case. Let's go to the next slide. So basically, we've just been through it. This is what His Excellency Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu is facing in the next 100 days. Because at the end of the day, he has to perform. He has 100 days to show us what the next potentially 8 years, because, you know, Nigerian presidents, once they get there for 4, they're going to take 8, what the next 8 years can be. And if we look at the outgoing President Muhammadu Buhari's first 100 days, he didn't have a government for the first 90 days. It took him 3, almost 4 months to put together a government. And we all saw how that ended up. So the American political analysts are right when they said the 100 days predict your presidency. So far, Bola Ahmed Tinubu is about 5 or 6 days in. Let's see what happens over these next few months, and we'll understand what we're in for until the next 8 years. Now, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please go ahead and subscribe. If you haven't hit that like button, please go ahead and hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed to Up Close and Center, please subscribe to Up Close and Center. That's my channel. I'll be dropping another documentary very soon. It'll be called Africans in Outer Space. It's fundamental and instrumental if anybody considers themselves to be a Pan-Africanist. If you don't understand the material that I've dropped, please go ahead and go through all of the documentaries I've dropped. They will give you a good understanding of what you need to know. But at the end of the day, this concludes our presentation here, and I'll be turning it back over to the Honorable Dynast Amir.
Hold on one. Let's see. Here we go. There we go. Here we go. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Like, share, subscribe. Until next time, family. Dynast Amir, search for Huru. Hope you guys enjoyed the presentation. Peace.